Hello there folks, my name is Spoonks, and DreamWorks has an interesting history of scrapped and cancelled animated movies. From Larrikins to Boo Baroo of Otherworldly Operations and Me and My Shadow. It's a shame that there have been so many animated films from them that haven't seen the light of day because they just didn't have as much faith of them as some of their other projects. But what if I told you that there was an animated film that was initially scrapped but was able to get a second chance? And believe it or not, it's probably not the one you're thinking about. That's right, folks. The Croods 2 was one of the animated films that DreamWorks decided to pull the plug on, but then had a change of heart and decided to give it a second chance, and the film was able to see the light of day. How did this happen? How did this movie get its second chance and was able to find a way to be seen by everybody? Well, that's what I'm here to discuss. This is how we finally got The Croods 2. Now, before we talk about the sequel, we've obviously got to talk about the first film. It was originally going to be a co-production between DreamWorks and Aardman about cavemen living together in prehistoric times, and was even going to be directed by Nick Park, but then Flushed Away flopped and Aardman and DreamWorks filed for a divorce after the fact. But it wouldn't mean the idea would go to waste from either of them. Aardman would turn it into the sports comedy Early Man, and DreamWorks would of course turn it into The Croods. Now, believe it or not, there was actually a lot riding on this movie. First off, it was going to be their first movie released under 20th Century Fox after their partnership with Paramount had ended a year prior, so this was to show off that they could still make and release high-quality animated movies under a new partnership. And also, their last film, Rise of the Guardians, was another big flop for them, and they really needed another hit after the losses from that film. And fortunately enough for them, it was. On the critical side of things, critics generally liked it. They had some issues with the story, but mainly praised the characters, humor, and animation. But the box office is also where it really shined, as it earned over $500 million worldwide, making it the fourth biggest animated film of the year, behind Monsters University, Despicable Me 2, and of course Frozen. And of course, when DreamWorks finds something to be a big hit, they're gonna sequelize it. And a little over a year after the first film released, it was announced that a sequel was going to be made. The Croods was gonna get a sequel sometime in 2017, with the original directing duo Kirk DeMicco and Chris Sanders back on board to make this new one. It was going to be the continuing evolution of man and even focus more on Uga as the central character. That all sounds pretty promising, and with this being one of the more well-received and beloved DreamWorks films, there was some high anticipation on where they could take this family. But then things started to change as DreamWorks suffered a lot of bumps in the road during the production of this movie. First off, after The Croods, they put out 4 animated movies, 1 in 2013 and 3 in 2014. And only one of them was a financial success. Everything else, from Turbo, Mr. Peabody and Sherman, and Penguins of Madagascar, all flopped at the box office, which resulted in DreamWorks having to make some drastic changes to their business model. Of course, this would lead to thousands of layoffs to recoup the losses from all of these movies, and they even had to change their release model, going from at least 2 to 3 movies a year to 1 to 2 movies a year. Another thing was that their relationship with 20th Century Fox was coming to its end, as Universal was interested in acquiring the company, and with that deal looking more and more like a reality, ultimately 20th Century Fox had to remove The Croods 2 from their release calendar since, well, it wasn't going to be their movie anymore. And once Universal bought DreamWorks, they assured the public that don't worry, The Croods 2 is still going to come out sometime in 2018. Their words, not mine. So yes, some minor bumps in the road, but The Croods 2 was still going to come out. We were still going to get this sequel. It's not like they would pull the plug on it or anything. Oh. In late 2016, it was announced that DreamWorks ultimately decided to cancel and scrap the second installment of the Croods franchise. Because this was announced shortly after the Universal acquisition, many thought it was Universal's decision to pull the plug, but DreamWorks assured everyone that it was their decision because they felt that production was severely falling behind many of their other projects that were far more ahead of where this movie was. And so ultimately, they just decided to end things there. And unfortunately, it seemed like the Croods journey into a film franchise had ended right then and there. Their only sort of follow-up they would receive would be an animated show on Netflix, as any chances for a new movie seemed very unlikely. Until a year later, when it was announced that production was back. I know, this actually came out of nowhere, especially at the time, because DreamWorks had many animated films just end production altogether, and they made sure that those productions ended and they would not get a second chance. Once a film was canceled, it was canceled. So the fact that this movie was able to get a second chance was mind-blowing. Of course, nowadays, any animated or even film in general that receives any sort of public backlash and support for its cancellation and wants to see the film release in theaters can find its second chance. But once again, back then, that was that. If your movie was done, finished, canceled, that was that. So the fact that DreamWorks had a change of heart was really surprising. However, it wouldn't be apples to apples comparison with the first film, as the original directing duo left the film to work on other projects, as Kirk DeMicco went to Sony to direct the animated musical Vivo, and Chris Sanders went to 20th Century Fox to direct the film adaptation of The Call of the Wild. And while the duo would still receive story by credits, they handed their directing duties to newcomer Joel Crawford, whose only sort of film directing jobs at DreamWorks was the Trolls Holiday Special. But they were still able to bring back pretty much all of the former cast from the first film, and even some newcomers like Peter Dinklage, Leslie Mann, and Kelly Marie Tran. And with production going forward, they announced that the film would release in December 2020, where it would release alongside The Tomorrow War and Tom and Jerry. So yes, folks, The Croods was getting a second chance. The film was going to see the light of day in theaters in 2020, just in time for the holidays and the start of a new decade. Things looked so bright and hopeful. Oh. Of course, this was 2020, so I think we all knew what happened. The COVID-19 pandemic pretty much stopped the world from moving at that point and severely halted and hindered the film industry, as moviegoing was seen as a big health risk during the pandemic, and ultimately many movies had to realize this new reality and make some changes. They would either have to be pushed back into the foreseeable future and hope things get better, or adapt to this new environment and release at home via a streaming service or video on demand. But not The Croods 2. It actually stuck to not only its theatrical release, but its date for quite some time, even after its former competition, The Tomorrow War and Tom and Jerry, vacated the Christmas slot to the new year. It was a pretty risky move on Universal's part, as children especially were at high risk of catching COVID, and once again, moviegoing was not where it was. It was still seen as a big health risk, and many people weren't going to the movies at that point, and the movies that were set to bring back people to the theaters didn't really, like The New Mutants, Unhinged, and Tenet. But eventually, the Croods had to realize this new reality and ultimately change their date. So, they inevitably changed their date from December 2020 to November 2020. Yeah, the movie was coming out a month earlier, which was, once again, a big risk on the studio's part. There wasn't an official reason as to why they changed it to a month early, but rumors were said that it was because A, Wonder Woman 1984, a highly anticipated movie, moved to the Christmas slot and they didn't want it to compete with that, and B, there were rumors that Soul was going to cancel its theatrical release and debut on Disney+, which is what inevitably happened. So yeah, the Croods 2 was coming out in Thanksgiving a month earlier. Again, this was seen as a big risk, as once again, many people, especially families, due to the health risk, were not going to the theater. And while people were definitely excited about it, it definitely wasn't going to be as big as the first one, given the effects that COVID-19 had on the general population. But then the day came. The film released in theaters on Thanksgiving weekend, and against all odds, it was actually able to find some success. Critics generally liked it about on par with the first one. Yeah, they had some issues with the story once again, but still praised the characters, humor, and the animation. But the box office is where it truly shined. Now, compared to what other animated movies nowadays make, this is nothing special, especially comparing it to Spider-Verse, Inside Out 2, and the Super Mario Bros. Movie. But folks, let me remind you, movie-going was not where it was today as it was in 2020 again. You know, many of the big movies that were said to bring people back to the movie theaters didn't. And with all of the animated movies going to be released at home or delayed to the foreseeable future, many people question why they would even do this, but the risk paid off, as the film made $58 million domestically and $216 million worldwide on a budget of $65 million. Again, compared to a lot of animated movies that release nowadays, this is nothing special. But once again, half of the theaters were closed. Many families were not going to the movie theater, and you know, it was just a bleak time. But strangely enough, the film was able to find a big enough audience to not only make back its budget, but stick around in the top 5 for at least 3 months, with 3 of its weekends being number 1, and then its 12th and 13th weekend returning to the number 1 spot. The film just had really solid legs and strong word of mouth, and really benefited from there being not a lot of movies out that people genuinely wanted to see. It was actually the biggest film of the post-pandemic domestically. Worldwide, it was behind Tenet, but still, domestically, it was able to beat films that were supposed to be the movies to bring back the movies. You know, once again, Tenet, The New Mutants, Unhinged, and even Wonder Woman 1984. Hell, it stayed the highest grossing film of the post-pandemic until it was surpassed by Godzilla vs. Kong in March. It was the biggest family film of the post-pandemic until it was surpassed by Space Jam in July, and it was the biggest animated film of the post-pandemic until Encanto in November. People really wanted to see this movie and showed up for it during the bleakest times. I don't know about you, but that seems very impressive to me. And its future was even brighter, as it also received another spin-off show that debuted on Peacock and Hulu, The Croods Family Tree, and the director Joel Crawford not only inked a deal with DreamWorks, but his very next film would receive even more admiration and success, as that was a little movie you may have heard of called Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. And that's pretty much how we got the Croods 2. I hope you enjoyed this different type of video from me. Definitely something new. I wanted to try something new and talk about the history of a movie that I felt like had a pretty interesting history. And I hope you all learned a bit more about this movie you probably haven't heard about in a while, and I hope you just learned something new and just enjoyed the video altogether. If you would like to see more videos like this, be sure to like and subscribe for sure. Comment down below. Let me know. You know, if you want to see more stuff like this in the future from me. And you know, once again, if you like this video, hit the like button. If you like this channel, hit the subscribe button. Follow me on all the social media links right there. And until next time, everyone, stay sharp.